Hello, my name is Michelle, and welcome to my channel, Michelle's Melancholia. I'm kind of spooked because I've spent all day watching this Netflix show that is really scary, and I know it's not going to be scary for everyone, but it's about demonic possession, and that's kind of like my soft spot when it comes to horror. And it's also a Mexican TV show. So basically, it views possession from the cultural lens that I had growing up. So it's a little bit too familiar, which makes it extra scary. There's a lot of elements that my mom, who is a big believer in everything supernatural, always warned me about. In case you're interested, the name is My Encounter with Evil, and it's on Netflix UK, so it's probably also in Netflix for other countries. And if you don't mind, you can just watch it with subtitles. And the format is part documentary, so there's like it's three people, three women telling their own stories about when they were possessed by a demon. So you have their testimonies, and there's also reenactment sections where it's just like actors. But I even looked it online, and it's supposed to actually be real stories. It's not like a mockumentary. It's only 4 episodes long. I'm currently mid 4th episode, but I wanted to film, so I paused for a little bit. But oh my god, at the end of the 3rd episode, there's like a big twist or like a big reveal that I didn't see coming, and I was like, I swear my jaw dropped. So also my partner is away, so it's just me tonight at home, so I hope I can sleep okay. If you want to be spooked, I do recommend it, but I also recognize it's not for everyone because it is possession with a heavy bias towards Catholicism, because that's the main religion in Mexico. But I guess if you're just like curious, you might enjoy it. I also found it super hilarious that they have some medical professionals like psychiatrists and things like that to give their point of view. And you can kind of see that they don't really believe in possession, but the whole thing is heavily biased towards conveying it as a real thing. So yeah, it's not super objective, but I'm really enjoying it. Anyways, that was way off topic. Today I will be doing my October wrap-up, and I will include my final rating and thoughts of all the books I read in October, but I will also speak a little bit about movies that I watched that I didn't review during my October vlogs. And I also wanted to chat about some fun activities that I did towards the end of the month, and there's a mini haul. It is kind of book related, so you may want to stick around for that, but if you don't, as always, you can just use the timestamps below to watch whatever interests you. Let's start talking about the books I read in October, and as always, I will list them from the one I liked the least to the one I liked the most. In absolutely no objective way. This was just my very own personal opinion. And because I was a busy bee during October, I only read 6 books, but that's totally fine. Let's start with The Torment of Rachel Ames by Jeff Gunnes. And this is about a woman who rents a secluded cabin in the woods. And she's going there because she is a writer but is suffering from a really bad case of writer's block. So she takes her typewriter and a bottle of whiskey and decides to stay over at the cabin to try to see if she can write. But then, obviously, strange things start to happen in the cabin. First of all, she meets really odd people that live in the area, even though the cabin is supposed to be quite secluded. And she starts getting attacked by animals. There's like wolves and birds. And what's even more concerning is that she starts having blackouts. Yeah, like she would wake up and a lot of time has passed and she has no idea what's going on. And in general, things like that to make her question if something supernatural is going on in the cabin or if she is kind of losing her mind, I guess. This started off really promising. This happens right at the beginning, so it's not a spoiler. I loved the backstory of how she got the typewriter. Basically, she inherited it from a teacher who was very famous for hating everything everybody else wrote, and she was his student. And one day she turns in a piece of her writing and he loves it, and as soon as he finishes reading it in class and he starts praising it, he has like an aneurysm and drops dead, and that's how she ends up inheriting his typewriter. Other than that, I'm afraid the rest of the story was not very good. It wasn't very engaging. It was one of those stories that is meant to be kind of like surreal, but I feel like in those types of stories there has to be some element that grounds it so that you can kind of follow the story along. Otherwise it's just like a jumbled mess, which is kind of what happened here. And basically the way the story was resolved, it was using a trope that I personally dislike because I think it's kind of lazy. Because then you don't have to justify anything, because without saying explicitly what the trope is, it is one of those where anything goes. So you can write anything and basically make it make sense at the end. So I guess it was just not for me. If you like stories that have a lot of confusion to make it unsettling, then you may enjoy it. The next book was my non-fiction pick for the month, and that is Making Evil: The Science Behind Humanity's Dark Side. It was written by Julia Shaw and published in 2019. And this was pitched as an exploration of what makes people do really bad things from a scientific perspective, using neuroscience, psychology, and philosophy. And I was actually planning on doing a thorough full review on these, but I had made some notes in my audiobook app, but then my local library removed this book from the catalog and then disappeared, and I lost all the notes. And I could try and scrounge up a review with what I remember, but I prefer to review my non-fiction a bit more rigorously than fiction, so I'm going to skip that review. In any case, it was not great. Chapter 1 was my favorite one because it was the neuroscientific and psychological studies that kind of give an explanation of why some people may be more inclined to do things we deem as evil than others based on their brain activity and the way different brain areas communicate information to each other. So that was good. But then in the rest of the chapters, where I expected the author to make a connection between the science of what happens in the brain to what actually leads people to commit the acts themselves, I felt like there was a huge disconnect there. And in the end, I just never understood what her ideas were on why, even though many people would be predisposed to be evil based on their brains, some of them end up acting on those desires, let's say, and some of them don't. However, what bothered me the most, perhaps, is that the author started off saying that basically our ideas of what is evil and what is not is strongly shaped by society and things like cultural context, and that she was going to attempt to explain evil without imposing a moral judgment on it. An idea which I was completely on board with, but then throughout the book she kept very heavily hinting which things she thought were morally good and which things she thought were morally bad. And there were some passages that, even though I agreed with her, they came off as incredibly preachy. And I think that's also fine, but then why would she say in the beginning that she was going to avoid doing that to then go and do it? The next book is Ghost Story by Peter Straub. And my lord, finishing this book was an accomplishment. Listen, I enjoy a slow burn. I enjoy books with a lot of seemingly unnecessary detail, but this book really drags on. So it is a story about a group of friends that they are older gentlemen now, but they have grown together in the same town, and they get together to tell each other stories in this little club they call the Chowder Society. And one night, one of them tells a particular story that is really creepy, by the way. And then strange things start happening in the town. So it seems that when telling this story, he's conjured up dark things from their pasts. And it's kind of this power that wants to destroy them. So they have to figure out how to fight it before it kills them. So I rated this one 3 stars. I absolutely loved the first half of the book. It starts off as a series of disconnected events, some of them very confusing, so you don't really know what's going on, but they are definitely very, very creepy. So I was like really hooked because I really wanted to understand how all these things fit together. And as I said, the story was moving very, very slowly, and I didn't really mind that. I think my main issue is that the level of scariness really started dipping, and I think the main problem I had is that the villains of the story, these supernatural dark forces, when they start to get revealed, to me, they were kind of cartoonish. For some reason, the way they were depicted, I just couldn't take them seriously, so I stopped being scared, and once I stopped being scared, I kind of stopped caring about where the story was going. However, I wanted to keep reading because I really wanted to see how the author tied the very confusing beginning with the end, and I was happy to see that that was actually very successful. It's a very well crafted plot, I have no doubt about that, but maybe the amount of effort I had to put into following the story was too much for the experience I actually got, if that makes sense. That was a lot of words to say. I wanted the second half of the book to be as scary as the first half of the book. That's all. But as I said, if you like long, complex plots, I really, really recommend this. The next book is Harrow Lake by Kat Ellis, and I gave this book 4 stars, and I already talked about this a lot during the October vlogs, so I'll just try to add a little card for the one where I spoke about this. But I really enjoyed it, and it's a YA, which are very hit or miss for me. But I thought it hit a really good middle ground of it being really fast-paced with a lot of scary stuff happening non-stop, I guess to capture like a younger reader's attention, with a very relatable female teenage character, and a story that in my opinion actually had some real substance behind it. So yeah, I do recommend this one. The next book is The Midnight Club by Christopher Pike, and I actually have a whole October vlog dedicated to talking about this book and the Netflix adaptation, so I will add a card for that as well. In short, this is about a group of teenagers that live in a hospice, which means they are all dying of terminal illness, and they have formed the Midnight Club in which they get together to tell each other stories, and the stories reflect their ideas and feelings surrounding life and death. And I loved this one because it was very emotional and it had some very interesting discussions about different philosophies people can have regarding life and death, and told from a very unique perspective of young people knowing that they won't get to live much longer. And finally, my favorite book of the month was Daphne by Josh Malerman, and funnily I had given these 4 stars. But now that I'm thinking about it, I've bumped it up to 5, and that was because I realized I was comparing it directly to my previous 5-star read, which was We Have Always Lived in the Castle, which I would say even within my 5-star reads is a little bit above the others, but when I looked at the rest of my 5-star reads, it fits perfectly in there. And actually I'm going to have a dedicated video review for this book. But basically what I'll say, it is about a girl who is part of her high school's basketball team. And one day before a big game, one of her teammates tell a story about this urban legend that is known in the town they live in about Daphne, who is a ghost woman. And after she tells this story, Kit basically can't stop thinking about it, wondering if it's real or not. And then the teammates start dying one by one. And I thought this book was so great, so original. And it's one of those that I really can't stop thinking about, and I'm kind of like itching to reread it. I would say that plot-wise, there are a few things that are left unexplained, or some parts of it that maybe don't fully make sense within the story. Or it's not that they don't make sense, they just don't seem to add anything to the actual story except vibes, I guess. But I'd say that this book is absolutely perfect for readers that don't care so much about bulletproof plots, but enjoy really thorough, interesting exploration of a concept rather than being told a story, if that makes sense. So yeah, I was surprised at how much I like this, and now I'm going to be reading all of Josh Malerman's other books. And obviously, please do tell me in the comments which was your favorite read of the month. And now let's quickly talk about some movies. These are the movies I watched during October, and again, most of them I have already reviewed during the October vlogs. So I just wanted to quickly talk about the ones I never had the chance to mention before. The first one is Deadstream, and this is a horror comedy about a YouTuber who basically does really stupid things for views. And if I remember correctly, he's kind of losing popularity because he did something controversial and he got cancelled. So he's trying to get viewership back. And the stunt he decides to pull is to lock himself in a haunted house. And of course, he comes to realize that the house is truly haunted. And horror comedy is not usually my thing, but I loved this one so much. It's one of those that I will definitely rewatch several times. The first half of the movie is so creepy. And it comes across as a more serious horror movie because most of the comedic elements come from the YouTuber character being really unlikable, but that's like expected. So the scary things that happen are actually super scary. The second half, when let's say the paranormal activity increases a lot, that's when some of the scary parts also come across as comedic. But it was done really well, and as I said, I feel like this is such a Halloween must-watch from now on. Then I watched The Woman in Black, which is a classic haunted house story. And what's really creepy is that this house is separated from the mainland by one of these roads that when the tide comes up, they disappear. So it's kind of like isolated. And the owner of the house has died, and this man has been put in charge of getting all the paperwork ready to sell the house. So he goes and stays there, and he finds out that it is haunted by the woman in black. What the movie does really well is all the creepy toy sequences. There's a bunch of like antique toys inside the house and they'll kind of like activate. They're super scary. But as far as storytelling goes, I watched it on stage as a play 2 years ago, and that was fantastic. So to be honest, when I watched the movie, and I had already watched it before and liked it, but when I rewatched it after watching the play, I was slightly underwhelmed. I really liked the ending though, so extra points for that. The next movie I watched was Ringu, so basically the Japanese version of The Ring. And the American version of The Ring is one of the movies that has scared me the most throughout my life. I watched it when it first came out, so I was a teenager and I was obsessed with it. It was the first movie I watched that included this kind of immersive experience. What I'm trying to say is that because you watch on the movie screen the contents of the tape, you kind of get the feeling that you've participated in the story. And obviously I was scared that the phone would ring and then I would die in 7 days, which didn't happen, in case you were curious. But obviously, as we all know, the Japanese original versions of movies tend to be much scarier than their American counterparts. However, I don't think that was the case with this one. Or maybe it's that I have an emotional attachment to the American The Ring movie. So it was fun, but at the end of the day, I think I prefer the remake. And then I watched Sadako vs. Kayako, which is a movie that puts together the villain from the Ringu movie and the villain from the Ju-on or the Grudge movie. And I thought this was just going to be silly. And it is kind of silly, but it's actually so good. And this one was really scary. And I'm not sure if it was released explicitly as a comedy horror, but it definitely has a lot of really comedic elements, mainly in that the characters that are trying to fight the two ghost entities are just really stupid and make really, really stupid decisions. So I would say if you both enjoy Ringu and Ju-on, you have to watch Sadako vs. Kayako. Okay, so to finish up the wrap-up, I want to show you a really cool book that I bought, but it has extensive backstory, but I think you may find it interesting, so I'm going to tell it to you. So basically, at the end of October, I attended an incredible exhibition at the National Museum of Scotland, which is in its own a fantastic place. And this exhibition was called Anatomy, a Matter of Death and Life. And it explored the history of anatomical study with a very, very big focus on Edinburgh and the University of Edinburgh. And that is because the Edinburgh Medical School is actually the oldest medical school in the UK. So it has a really, really long tradition of teaching anatomy. And actually, a lot of big names attended Edinburgh Medical School, including Charles Darwin, which of course is famous for his work on evolutionary biology, but also Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who, as you all probably know, was the creator of Sherlock Holmes. But before I go off topic again, the exhibition also had a huge focus on William Burke and William Hare. So if you haven't heard about Burke and Hare before, they were two serial killers that are super famous in Edinburgh, and they were active in 1827 and 1828. And basically what they did is that they killed people to sell their bodies to Dr. Robert Knox, who was like the top lecturer in the anatomy department, so that the bodies could be dissected for teaching. Or research, I guess. And at that time in Scotland, dissecting human bodies was allowed when the person had died in prison. So obviously the amount of bodies that could be acquired through legal means was relatively low. And the demand was huge because anatomical teaching and research was booming. So typically what other criminals would do would be to rob graves and then sell those bodies to the researchers. But Burke and Hare had no patience for that, so they decided to start killing people themselves rather than having to wait for someone to die and then be buried so they could rob the grave. And then what happened is that at some point bodies were found in the hotel where Burke and Hare were staying in, and then they did the investigation and obviously they were detained. And what happened is that they convinced Hare to confess and throw the other guy under the bus, which he did. So he was released, and then he went off and disappeared, whereas William Burke did end up going to prison, and not only that, he was also executed, and therefore his body was dissected for teaching and research purposes. He was dissected by a Professor Monroe, which allegedly he dipped a quill into Burke's blood, and then on the book where he was taking notes, he wrote, "This is written with the blood of William Burke, who was hanged at Edinburgh. This blood was taken from his head." And then Burke's skeleton was donated to the Edinburgh Anatomical Museum, and I've seen it at the actual museum before, but it was also present at this temporary exhibition that I went to. And this wasn't in the exhibition, but apparently there is also a book found in his skin. And I just want to quickly mention that after this delightful story, there was a truly delightful section in the exhibition where there were several testimonies from medical professionals and members of the public that have family members or loved ones donate their bodies to anatomical research, and they were basically highlighting the importance of acquiring these bodies and how they are put to good use to train new people in the medical profession. So, getting back to the book, the last bit of context I have to give you is that one thing I cannot resist are museum gift shops. I literally always have to buy something. I just feel like they always have the coolest stuff, so I just want to do a mini haul. And also, usually the profits from museum gift shops get put back into the museum, and that is how I justify these purchases. First, I got this really cool print. It's a replica of an actual anatomical illustration. That was only like 50p. And then this super cute skeleton pin badge. Then I can never resist a t-shirt, so I got this one. And finally, the book that I was talking about. It is called Crucial Interventions. It is by Richard Barnett, an illustrated treatise on the principles of practice of 19th century surgery. And look at this. It's bound with cloth on the side, and I'm going to show you some bits on the inside, but a bit of a trigger warning for explicit medical illustrations. If you're a little bit squeamish about those kinds of things, you may not find it very appealing. So it has all educational illustrations regarding to the practice of surgery. Some of them as simple as different ways to hold a scalpel, and it is divided in different body parts. There is definitely a lot of text as well, so I'll probably spend a good amount of time going through it. And I'm just fascinated by 19th century surgery because they were basically just starting to figure things out. I mean, obviously there's been surgical type practices, I think, since the dawn of humanity. I think I saw somewhere recently, maybe it was even on a TikTok, about human remains being found, really early human remains where someone had undergone an amputation, and it definitely looked like this person had healed and recovered from the amputation. But I guess this is the time where surgery was starting to be documented and studied rigorously and obviously taught to other people. So for example, here we have different types of incisions for eye surgery. And talking about amputation, how to remove body parts. Anyways, if you would be interested in doing kind of like a chapter by chapter review or recap of these. I know it's kind of like a niche interest, but if you're interested, I will be extremely happy to do it. So let me know. Okay, I feel like this video is way too long, so I'm just going to say goodbye. And of course, just leave any thoughts you have in the comments below, and I will see you on my next video. But until then, goodbye.